Hello and welcome to MTG Deck Tech. So, Mythic Championship VII is in the books, and my predictions were, a little off. I didn't expect Simic Flash to do as well as it did. The three people who played Simic Flash, Seth Manfield, Brett Nelson, and Javier Dominguez, all got into the top 8 of the tournament, which is pretty insane at a tournament with 67 people playing in it. So I think it's worth taking another look at this Simic Flash deck, because I'll have to admit that I did not really look at the deck the way I should have. I really read all the deck lists pretty closely, but with Simic Flash I just skimmed over it and said, oh yeah, it's Simic Flash. We all know what Simic Flash does. Unfortunately, we do not know what Simic Flash does. The whole field didn't really know it, except for these 3 players who tested together. So, what does this Simic Flash do differently than other Simic Flash decks? First of all, we have to talk a little bit about the deck choice itself. I thought it was gonna be bad against Fires of Invention, but it does have some ramp elements in it here, the Growth Spiral and stuff like that. So we have a very nice counterplay against Fires of Invention. So yeah, this deck also worked very nice against the other Flash decks because it has some great threats, which I will come to later. But yeah, this was definitely the deck choice to have in this tournament. It really broke the meta open. And what the deck did differently, it took out a few cards that were like almost given staples in any Simic Flash decks, and yeah, put in some other cards. So let's see what it took out. It took out the Brinebond Cutthroat. So the Brinebond Cutthroat is a 2-mana spell that has Flash, of course, because it's Simic Flash, it's the namesake. But it can get +1/+1 counters each time you cast a spell during your opponent's turn. So this seems to be like a card made for Simic Flash. Yet it wasn't put in. And the biggest reason for that I can see now that I've seen how this deck works is because with the Brinebond Cutthroat you really need to play it early to have an enormous impact. But in the early game you will also want to counter some spells of your opponents, for example with Quench or with the Aether Gust or Negate in the early game, to not let them get any board presence. So Brinebond Cutthroat really has a bad synergy with the other cards in this deck because it needs to get down early to be effective. So yeah, this is why taking out Brinebond Cutthroat was in retrospective a very good idea of these 3 players, because they could use the early game to quench their opponent's spells, to counter them, to make their life miserable. So yeah, taking out Brinebond Cutthroat was definitely the right thing to do. The same thing goes for Rightborn Preserver. It's basically the same thing because it's a 2-mana creature. You also want to get it out early, and you can pump it, you can use it as a mana sink if you play another non-human creature, which every creature in the Simic Flash deck was. But so most of the people put like 2 or maybe even 3 or 4 in that deck, and pump it each time another creature gets into the battlefield. So this is nice. This thing can get really big really fast, and so it's a bit better in respect to that compared to the Brinebond Cutthroat. But you will need to play creatures, so you don't play the counterspell in this turn, except for Frilled Mystic, of course. But whenever you play creatures, you will basically lose the chance of playing counterspells, except for the late game where you can do both. But Rightborn Preserver really, needs you to play creatures, and it also needs you to have mana open. So it's really only getting bigger in the late game. So yeah, Rightborn Preserver is still a card that you really need to play early, but you won't want to play it early because you need to counter stuff. And also, in the late game there are better things. And we will come to them later. We also see Paradise Druid in this deck, which is a ramp creature which doesn't have any flash ability. So you need to play it on your turn. So it's very hard for this flash deck because you will need to sacrifice some power. But it is okay in the early game, especially against the meta that was present, because basically the Fires of Invention decks really only need to play spells at turn 4 and later, because they want to get in Fires of Invention, and they don't play that much until then. So you can still play it for 2 mana. You can also use that to fix your mana if you need the 5th mana for Nissa, which we will speak about next. If you need the 5th mana and you didn't find your land, you can use the Paradise Druid and still have mana open for a counterspell like the Quench or the Aether Gust. Aether Gust really turned out really well as well, because there are some green creatures in the format, for example the Core Vault, and there's also red stuff, for example Fires of Invention, which you can soft counter with the Aether Gust. So having Aether Gust is also a very nice thing to have in this format. But really what really broke open the meta, in my opinion, was Nissa, who shakes the world. We all know about Nissa, we all know she's strong, we've seen a lot about her in the Oko meta. Most of the times you had a Nissa 2 that made you free land creatures, which had vigilance and haste, so you could really fill up the board with stuff. And this is really what the Simic Flash deck needed, because with the Simic Flash deck, you really always had the problem of having late game power. The only really good spell to have in the late game was the Night Pack Ambusher, because it could make you free wolves, and you could flash it in and stuff, and it is 4/4, it's a very nice card. It's still a very nice card in this deck and won a lot of games, but you only really had the Night Pack Ambusher. And if you didn't have that, you couldn't do that much. Especially if you lost like your Brinebond Cutthroat or stuff like that. But Nissa, with Nissa you can do a lot of things. You can make your lands into creatures. You can also, in the turn that you play the Nissa, you can reanimate your breeding pool, untap it, and have like, because of Nissa's static ability that makes you another green mana, you can have the counter spell ready even after you used the 5 mana for Nissa. You still have counter spell ready for Aether Gusts or Negates or Quenches. Of course, Quenches won't be that great in the late game, but you still have some options to work with, and not just, yeah, you play the Nissa and you can't do anything anymore. Because of the breeding pool, you can, because it's a forest as well, and you get another green mana for it. What you can also do with the Nissa is play Hydroid Krasis. This also is not a flash creature, but it also finds a very nice spot in the deck, because it just draws you cards and it gains you life, and it's just a big creature that you can really make really big with the Nissa and the ramp elements of the deck. Yeah, you all know Simic Ramp, you all know what the Hydroid Krasis can do, but yeah, to see it in this deck was a bit surprising. But seeing as though Nissa makes you a lot of mana and you have stuff like Growth Spiral to get you there, it's a very nice card to have. Even if it gets countered, you still have the card draw and the life gain, which I think helped the deck against other flash decks, the Izzet Flash, which really only had one late game threat, which was the Gadwick, which was used to turn stuff sideways. But with Nissa and the Hydroid Krasis going over it, it's really tough to keep up with how many spells you need to play with the Gadwick to get stuff tapped. So this is why Simic Flash performed so much better than the Izzet Flash. And yeah, this is basically the reasons why the Simic Flash deck broke open the format. I guess there was still a bit of card luck involved, as always in Magic, but seeing as all the 3 decks got into the top 8, it can't just be luck. It really has to be this deck being awesome. And yeah, this deck I didn't at all expect. I didn't even look at it the right way. I didn't even look at the Nissa being in it. And yeah, this is just blown me away. Blown a lot of people away, I think. The other people in the tournament didn't expect to see that, I think. And yeah, it really paid off. Of course, it lost in the final against the Jund Sacrifice deck, which was also a very nice deck in this tournament. We talked about it a lot in the last time because I predicted it to be a good deck. But seeing as though in the top 8 you only really have 2 Jund Sacrifice, with Jund Sacrifice being played by about 70% or so of the players, and the Simic Flash that was only played by 3 players being 3 times in the top 8, this was an amazing run for Simic Flash. So we'll have to see if people find something to work against the Simic Flash. Jund Sacrifice could work. You would really need to put other stuff in it to deal with the counter spells. Maybe we see the reinvention of Sultai Flash, Sultai Sacrifice, because you do have the blue spells, you can play the Mystical Disputes and stuff like that to counter the counter spells. But yeah, whenever you have a deck that is not optimal because you don't have Oko anymore, and you have to play it because you need the counter spells, that's not really the way you want to play the game. So we'll have to see. We also have to see how Fires develops. If we see less people in Arena playing Fires, because it really was so bad, it only got one person into the top 8, with it being the most played deck. So we'll have to see how that works out. If Fires isn't played anymore, maybe there's some room for some other decks with small creatures, maybe some red aggro coming back. I'm always hoping for that, but yeah, we'll have to see about that. But I'll definitely watch that and see if I can make another video on it. For the next time, I'm probably going to do the Gruul Ambercleave deck, which I'm doing in Historic right now, because I really love Veil of Summer. People who know me know that I love that card because it gets those damn counter spells away from me. And seeing as how Simic Flash was very good in this tournament, I'm also only expecting more of those in Standard. So I don't want that. Maybe you do. I'm not into counter spells matters. And yeah, let's see if we can make something that counters the counter spells, basically. But until then, I'm gonna play Historic, and we'll see each other in the next time. This was MTG Deck Tech signing off.